The building came alive slowly each morning as though reluctantly waking from its own indifference. Security unlocked the revolving doors with glazed expressions, lights flickered to full strength one floor at a time, and the scent of industrial-strength disinfectant still clung to the carpets before it was masked by perfume and ego. She arrived before all of it, her movements as precise as the ticking of the clock in the HR wing she'd polished so often she could hear its rhythm without looking. She entered through the service entrance, like always, a small ID badge clipped to a jacket that wasn't part of any power suit, no sound from her other than the soft squeak of her cart's wheels echoing in empty halls. Her route never changed, but her awareness of it deepened over time. She knew which executives arrived early and which pretended they did. She knew who left their monitors unlocked, who scribbled numbers on post-its and left them face up, who whispered confidential conversations into speakerphones like no one else could hear them. They never looked at her. That was their first mistake. She saw them. All of them. And more importantly, she saw what they missed. The desk that would become her symbol of transformation stood untouched in the corner office. Sleek, overpolished, underused. The man who sat behind it believed in volume over clarity and control over competence. His words filled meetings, but his decisions drained departments. He cared more about perception than performance, about headlines than health. She cleaned the desk every day, wiping down decisions that cost people jobs, families, homes. She never left fingerprints. She made sure of that. They saw her as a shadow background, service, a fixture. They didn't know her name, only her presence, and even that barely. She was the one they stepped around when their laughter echoed too loudly. She was the one they ignored when they left their dirty mugs behind after catered lunches. They thanked her reflexively, like pushing an elevator button, never realizing how unnecessary their words were when their eyes said something else. She was the help. A cleaner. Disposable. But every night, after the lights dimmed and the last overpriced SUV pulled away from the lot, she sat on the third-floor bench near the elevator, opened her second-hand laptop, and became something else entirely. She was an analyst again. A strategist. A researcher. She downloaded public financials, compiled spreadsheets, tracked the movement of investment arms, noticed the sudden resignation of a junior executive with no public explanation. She saw the signs of decay from beneath the shine. And she took notes. Her gloves became armor, her mop a disguise. No one questioned the cleaner. No one searched her bag when she left with a discarded document. No one wondered why the night crew suddenly changed 2 months ago because she'd bought out the contractor. Quietly. Efficiently. She chose the replacements herself. People who owed her favors or trusted her cause. People who believed her when she said she wasn't here to clean forever. She had once sat at tables just like theirs. She had once made decisions, too good ones. Until things fell apart. Until someone else's mistake ended her contract. Until she was scapegoated by a mentor who feared her rise. She could have fought back. But instead, she watched. Learned. Waited. She found work where she could. And when a friend said a janitorial company was hiring for a major corporate campus, she didn't flinch. She put on the uniform. She entered the system through its lowest level. And she studied it from within. The desk wasn't for cleaners. That's what he'd said. And it wasn't a shout or a threat, it was casual, offhand, the way men in power mark their territory without even thinking. But it stuck. She cleaned the desk more carefully after that. Not out of spite. Out of calculation. She traced the edge with a cloth and imagined what her hands would feel like when they rested there, not in labor, but in command. By the end of that first year, she owned shares in 3 minor suppliers. By the end of the second, she had quietly partnered with a former investment director who still owed her for a past favor. And by the third, she had secured controlling interest in the vendor firm responsible for non-executive staffing. They didn't even notice when her name appeared, hidden in the fine print of a holding company masked by the anonymity they'd always assumed she carried. When she spoke to the lawyers, she didn't use the language of revenge. She used the language of compliance, liability, optimization. Words they respected. Words they didn't associate with her voice. But those words were now tools, and she wielded them like instruments. Every morning, she still came in. She still cleaned. She still listened. Because until the day the letters were signed, until the boardroom doors opened under her authority, she would not give them even a flicker of suspicion. They would never see her coming. And that was her greatest weapon. Because soon she wouldn't be polishing that desk. She'd be assigning it. The weeks that followed passed like silent machinery, each day a repetition of routine, each night a careful calibration of power. She moved between offices with practiced anonymity, gathering not dust, but information. When she emptied trash bins, she noted what people discarded without thought: drafts of presentations, annotated memos, hand-marked internal reports. She didn't need to search through locked cabinets. The most valuable intelligence was always what people threw away. She watched how the board operated from the shadows of conference rooms. The executives spoke in circles, hiding uncertainty with buzzwords, camouflaging incompetence with noise. Decisions were made not through merit, but through alliances, favors traded behind closed doors, influence measured in cocktails and handshakes. She watched one board member push a disastrous product strategy because he owed a friend a contract. Another masked a financial gap by shifting numbers just enough to make the quarterly report shine. It was all surface, all fraud under polish. And they didn't see it because they never expected to be seen. She worked alone, not out of distrust, but out of necessity. There were no allies in her corner, not yet. Only observers. People who suspected something unusual about her but lacked the language or position to name it. A few janitors started asking why she always carried a tablet beneath her cleaning cart. One administrator noticed that she read the same internal memos the board passed among themselves. But no one spoke up. They weren't sure if what they saw was real or imagined. That uncertainty was her shield. Meanwhile, her control expanded. She secured silent influence in another holding company that provided outsourced tech staffing. She gained a whisper-thin majority stake in a security subcontractor. Through legal precision and careful timing, she obtained veto power over operational partnerships, all through intermediary firms that the board had never bothered to vet thoroughly. Their world was designed to preserve power for themselves, not to protect it from below. She didn't intend to dismantle the company. That was never the plan. She respected the bones of it, the core product, the market potential, the infrastructure that had once been sound. What she wanted was correction. Realignment. The restoration of substance over ego. She had been inside the building long enough to know who actually did the work. She had seen brilliance buried beneath bureaucracy. If she could remove the rot, the place could thrive. And she had already begun preparing for the transition. At night, she drafted termination letters. Not out of emotion, but out of necessity. She wrote them cleanly, professionally, with bulletproof justification. She documented misconduct, misuse of funds, gross negligence. She hired legal counsel who never met her face to face, only knew her through encrypted communication and pre-funded retainers. The plan was airtight. Her ascent would be brutal not because she desired cruelty, but because it was the only way to end their comfort. The moment was coming. She could feel it in the change of tone when her name came up. She overheard executives wondering why her contract name appeared on a compliance report. She noticed the HR director triple-checking vendor registrations. Eyes were shifting toward her slowly. Suspicion was blooming. But she wasn't worried. By the time they realized what was happening, the elevator would already be taking her to the top floor. And the only thing left to do would be to hand them the envelope. The day before the meeting was ordinary. That was intentional. She arrived at her usual time. She cleaned the usual floors. She offered the same nods, the same tight-lipped smile, the same silence. No one noticed anything different. But internally, everything was coiled tight. She reviewed her documentation twice, checked signature files, confirmed board votes through proxies. The building ran as if on autopilot, unaware of the approaching reset. The board had scheduled a quarterly strategy meeting. It was meant to be routine, performative, another round of recycled goals, exaggerated success metrics, and deferred accountability. They had no idea the agenda had already been rewritten. Not just amended, but replaced entirely. She had registered the new items through a backdoor vote passed through a shell entity that had majority rights. Their system had loopholes. She had memorized them. That evening, she returned home and laid out everything she would wear. No more uniform. No gloves. No cart. Just a tailored suit she had kept hidden for years, folded carefully beneath old receipts and time cards. She took it out slowly, ran her hand across the fabric. It smelled like memory. Like who she had once been, before the fall, before the mop, before the silence. The next morning, she didn't enter through the service door. She walked through the front, her steps measured, her eyes forward. The receptionist stared, confused, trying to place her face. A few junior employees whispered, nudged one another. Someone asked if she was an external consultant. She didn't respond. She simply rode the elevator to the top floor and entered the boardroom before the others had arrived. She took her seat at the head of the table. One by one, the board members arrived. Their faces shifted from confusion to irritation to discomfort. They didn't understand. She watched them glance toward each other, waiting for someone to explain. When no one could, they turned to her not in deference but in disbelief. She let them sit. She let them open their laptops and prepare their scripts. Then the door closed. The legal advisor stood at her queue and began reading the changes. One by one, ownership rights were confirmed. One by one, clauses were referenced. Votes. Acquisitions. Authority. The words fell like quiet bombs. Some argued. Some bluffed. One demanded a recess. She said nothing. She didn't need to. The papers were real. The authority was real. The company now answered to her. When the advisor handed her the termination packets, she signed each one with steady hands. No one moved. No one spoke. The man with the desk said nothing at all. He just stared, jaw clenched, as if language had suddenly failed him. And just like that, the room emptied. She remained at the table, surrounded by silence. She didn't cry. She didn't smile. She just sat there, letting the room settle around her, letting the weight of it all finally unfold. She had walked this path for years, cleaned its floors, studied its files, endured its contempt. And now it was hers. She didn't redecorate the office. The desk remained in its place, unaltered, a relic of a man who once believed she didn't belong near it. She kept it not as a trophy but as a reminder of everything that had been said to her, done to her, ignored about her. She didn't sit behind it right away. Instead, she walked the floors. All of them. From the basement storage rooms to the executive lounges. She moved through them slowly, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone reclaiming space that had long tried to erase her. The first days after the board was removed were filled with quiet panic among the remaining staff. Rumors moved faster than emails. No one knew what kind of leader she would be. They remembered her mop. They remembered her silence. And now they were watching closely, unsure of whether she had come to punish or to rebuild. She gave them neither. She gave them structure. Departments were audited. Systems streamlined. Policies rewritten not by consultants, but by people from within, the workers who had been doing the jobs longest, who knew where the real inefficiencies lived. She didn't replace people to make a point. She replaced those who had exploited the system. She didn't announce new values. She installed new standards. Measurable ones. Transparent. Fair. She met with teams at odd hours, not to test them, but because she knew what it meant to be on night shift. She asked questions, took notes, implemented changes quickly. Her leadership didn't come with applause or performance. It came with effectiveness. Her silence remained, but it no longer came from suppression. It was strategy. She used it to listen. Some still resented her. That was expected. People loyal to the old regime, to their version of what leadership should look like. They whispered about her past. They tried to find flaws in her resume, inconsistencies in her record. But the truth was airtight. She had nothing to hide. And everything they tried to use against her only highlighted how little they had seen. The company's numbers stabilized first. Then they climbed. Vendors reported faster payments. Employees reported lower stress. Clients noticed clearer communication. But the most important change wasn't on a spreadsheet. It was in the eyes of the janitor she passed one night in the lobby. He didn't flinch when he saw her. He nodded. She nodded back. And in that moment, nothing needed to be said. She knew what it felt like to be erased. And now she was writing people back into the story. Power, once seized, demanded discipline. She had not come to the top by accident or invitation. She had claimed her seat by force, not through violence, but through will. And now every decision she made would be watched through a different lens. She was no longer invisible. She was undeniable. And the scrutiny that came with that was constant. She rose earlier than ever. Worked longer than before. Not because she felt she needed to prove herself, but because she knew what it meant to hold something that others wanted to take. Her calendar was full. Meetings, reviews, negotiations. But she never let it become noise. Every conversation had weight. Every decision was a continuation of her blueprint, a vision to transform a culture built on exclusion into one founded on recognition. She implemented mentorship programs that reached past titles. She partnered junior staff with veterans who had been overlooked for years. She opened anonymous suggestion channels that actually led to policy changes. She changed the office layout to remove unnecessary status walls. But she also raised expectations. She didn't tolerate complacency. Compassion, yes. Laziness, no. And because she had been on the floor, because she knew every step of the ladder, her expectations were grounded in truth. Some executives tried to charm her. Others tried to intimidate. Neither worked. She had learned long ago how to see through both masks. She didn't argue. She didn't defend. She let results speak, and her presence reinforced what those results meant. Her leadership wasn't loud. It was permanent. Outside press began to circulate stories about her rise. The headlines were dramatic, sometimes exploitative. They wanted scandal. She gave them silence. She didn't do interviews. She didn't explain herself to those who never cared until she had power. Her story didn't belong to them. It belonged to those who had walked the same halls and felt the same walls press against them. Her story was a blueprint, not a spectacle. The man who once sat at the desk tried to contact her. Through lawyers. Through mutual acquaintances. She declined. Not out of spite, but because his time had passed. She didn't owe him a conversation. She owed herself peace. She returned home each night exhausted but clear. She didn't decorate her office with awards or certificates. She kept the same photo in her drawer, a picture of her first day cleaning the building. She looked at it sometimes, not with pain, but with pride. She had never been less than who she was now. The world had simply needed time to catch up. The company she had inherited was no longer recognizable, not because she had destroyed it, but because she had refined it. What remained was what worked, what lifted, what empowered. She hadn't created a utopia. There were still challenges, disagreements, failures, but there was also trust. And that, she had learned, was the rarest currency in leadership. She walked the floors still, not as surveillance, but as presence. People didn't shrink when she passed. They spoke, shared, smiled. Some didn't know her past. Some did. It didn't matter. What mattered was that she had made the building livable not just for herself, but for everyone who came through the doors. On the anniversary of her official takeover, there was no celebration. She spent the day as she had spent every other, reviewing strategy, listening to updates, signing off on new initiatives. But that evening, when most of the staff had gone home, she walked into the lobby alone and sat on the bench she used to rest on after late shifts. The same bench where she had once opened a battered laptop with trembling fingers and dared to imagine something more. She sat there not to reflect, but to breathe. Not to remember who she had been, but to honor that she had never stopped being her. Even when they laughed. Even when they ordered her out. Even when they said the desk wasn't for cleaners. That desk was now hers. But she rarely used it. She didn't need a desk to lead. She needed clarity. And she had it. She had changed everything, not by becoming someone else, but by refusing to be erased. And the building, once so cold, finally began to feel like hers. Because now, when she walked in, the place stood a little taller. Because now, she was no longer surviving inside the system. She was defining it.